Imagine this. 28-year-old ship's cook, no engineering degrees, no sonar expertise, just pure observation. His insane idea, laughed at by everyone, ended up stopping German submarines from detecting convoy ships and changed the course of World War II. Sounds crazy, right? Now, let's rewind a bit, back to 1943. The Allies were on the edge of losing one of the most critical battles of the war, the Battle of the Atlantic. The German U-boats were hunting down Allied convoys with brutal precision. These U-boats had an incredible advantage. They could hear every convoy from miles away, even before they saw them. You see, the ocean carries sound like a beacon in the night. Every turn of a propeller, every rumble of machinery, it all carried through the water, making it so easy for the U-boats to pick out their targets. The Allies tried everything to evade detection. They zigzagged their ships, they practiced radio silence, and they even used sonar, but nothing seemed to work. The U-boats, hunting in wolf packs, knew the convoys were out there, and they could hear them coming. Ship after ship went down, faster than the Allies could replace them. Imagine the crushing weight on the crews, knowing that each convoy was a potential death sentence. The loss of ships and lives was unsustainable, and yet, no one had the answer. But then, something happened. In the belly of one of these Liberty ships, down in the engine room, there was a cook. Tommy Lawson, no scientist, no engineer, just a guy doing his job. He spent his days washing dishes, cooking meals, and keeping the crew fed. But during his off hours, he'd slip down to the engine room. Why? Because Lawson had noticed something strange, something that no one else had. When a ship was struck by a torpedo and started sinking, the chaos would erupt, the explosion, the panic, the cries of the crew. But there was something Lawson noticed that no one else did. After the explosion, after the ship started going down, the ship became silent. Not the silence of death, not the kind of silence that comes with destruction, but a strange, eerie silence. The machinery noise stopped, the propellers, the engines, the vibrations, all gone. Lawson couldn't explain it, but he knew it meant something. Now here's where things get wild. Lawson started to think, what if that silence, the one he heard when a ship was sinking, was the key? What if he could somehow make the ships quieter, without sinking them, of course? What if there was a way to reduce the noise so that the U-boats couldn't hear them? Tommy Lawson's idea was so insane, so unorthodox, so far from anything that could possibly work, that no one took him seriously. He thought, what if we could flood parts of the ship, just enough water to drown out the noise, without sinking it? Ridiculous, right? It sounded crazy. Engineers laughed it off. Officers scoffed. They couldn't see how it could possibly work. It was just a cook. What did he know about acoustics or machinery? Yet Lawson couldn't let it go. It stuck with him. It gnawed at him. And he kept sketching diagrams, trying to make sense of this idea. Despite being dismissed time and time again, Tommy didn't stop. He went back to his ship's engineer, tried explaining it again. He drew up new diagrams. He went to the first mate. He even went to his captain, Captain Bannerman. But the response was always the same. This is nonsense, Lawson. Just get back to your galley. You're a cook, not an engineer. But Lawson had a fire inside him. He knew somehow that this idea could work. He wasn't going to give up. And then came the turning point. Lawson didn't just wait for someone to take him seriously. He did something crazy. He walked straight into the Western Approach's command headquarters in Liverpool. He walked up to the front desk and demanded to speak to someone about the convoy noise problem. He didn't care that it was a restricted military facility. He didn't care that he was a civilian, that he was just a cook. He had an idea that might save lives, and he wasn't going to let anyone stop him from sharing it. Now, you might think this was the end of it, but no. Lawson was arrested on the spot. The guards didn't care about his ideas. They were ready to throw him out. But just as they were about to escort him out of the building, something miraculous happened. A voice cut through the tension. Wait, what did you say about convoy noise? It was Commander Peter Gretton, a seasoned Royal Navy officer who had just come back from a convoy that had lost 13 merchant ships to the U-boats. Gretton was desperate. He'd lost ships. He'd seen the devastation. And when he heard Lawson's idea, he thought, why not? What's the harm in hearing him out? And that's when everything started to change. Gretton took Lawson seriously. He brought him to the HMS Sunflower, a Royal Navy corvette. They set up a small-scale prototype. creating what would later be called liquid acoustic dampening. They welded sealed chambers around the propeller shaft and filled them with seawater. They even used sandbags to simulate the weight of water pressing against the machinery. But when they tested it, it didn't work. At first, Lawson's idea seemed like a complete failure. But Lawson noticed something. The seawater-filled chambers had leaked during the test. The system wasn't watertight. And that was the missing piece. They sealed the chambers. They made sure the water didn't leak. And they tried again. The next test was a game-changer. The submarine's hydrophone operator could no longer hear the Sunflower at the same range. It worked. The ship, with its simple, crude modifications, had become invisible to the U-boat's detection systems. With this newfound success, the idea moved forward. It wasn't just a theory anymore. They implemented it on a handful of ships. And when the next convoy set sail, those ships were scattered throughout the formation. No one knew about the experiment. It was kept secret. And when the U-boats attacked, they couldn't detect those modified ships. One by one, they slipped through the enemy lines. The cook's insane idea had saved lives. But the true test was yet to come. This simple, yet revolutionary idea, modifying ships to reduce their acoustic signature, changed the course of the Battle of the Atlantic. The Allies started winning the battle, and ship losses dropped by 85%. But the most devastating blow came to the U-boats. They couldn't hunt the way they used to. The wolf packs couldn't communicate, couldn't coordinate attacks, and the Allies had gained the upper hand. The first real test, however, would come under the harshest possible conditions. The next convoy that set out with the modified ships aboard was nothing short of a gamble. The modified vessels, now nearly silent on the ocean, were mixed into the convoy formation, 2 in the starboard columns, 2 on the port side, and 2 in the center. No one knew what was at stake except for those directly involved in the experiment. But the true power of the idea would only be revealed when the convoy met the U-boats. For days, the wolf packs had been tracking the convoy, confident they'd sink everything in their path. The enemy had learned to expect the same sounds, the same predictable noise from every convoy. But this time, as the U-boat commanders took their positions, they realized something was wrong. They could no longer hear the convoy in the way they were used to. Aboard the U-boat U-264, Captain Hartwig studied his charts carefully. His hydrophone operator had been tracking convoy sounds for hours, but the signals were weak and inconsistent. He frowned. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered. The operator signaled again. "Sir, something's off. I'm hearing some ships, but some ships have just disappeared." It was as if the convoy had become invisible, even though it was right there in front of them. Captain Hartwig gave the order to surface, but the U-boat didn't have the advantage it once did. The convoy, once a predictable target, was now a mystery. The modified ships, those with Lawson's liquid acoustic dampening system, were slipping by undetected. The U-boat crews targeted only the ships they could hear. The others? They were ghosts in the ocean. This was it, the moment of truth. The real-world test of Tommy Lawson's insane idea had arrived. Over 18 hours of attack, the German U-boats launched assault after assault, but of the 9 ships sunk, not one of them was a modified vessel. The 6 modified ships, those with the special acoustic dampening system, survived untouched. No enemy torpedoes hit them, not one. And that, my friends, was the turning point in the Battle of the Atlantic. It wasn't just about saving those 6 ships, it was about proving a concept, a simple yet groundbreaking idea that could change the course of the war. The success of the experiment sent shockwaves through the Allies. For the first time, they had something that could help them survive the U-boat peril. When the convoy returned to Liverpool, Commander Peter Gretton immediately sent a signal to London. The modified vessels had survived. The acoustic dampening system worked under real combat conditions. The next step was clear: expand the testing. Fleet-wide implementation would save thousands of lives. But even then, there were skeptics. The Navy brass, the experts who had dismissed Lawson's idea, were still not convinced. The question was whether they could afford to retrofit more ships, whether the risk of diverting resources for something so untested would pay off. The timeline was tight. The war was pressing. The loss of merchant ships continued. In a tense meeting with Admiral Max Horton and senior officers, Gretton stood his ground. "This is it," he said. "If we don't try this, we will lose. If we don't make this work, The U-boats will wipe us out by the summer. And that was when the decision was made. They would retrofit a group of 6 merchant ships for the next convoy. If it worked, it could be rolled out across the fleet. Of course, implementing this idea wasn't easy. The modifications had to be carried out under the radar, literally. The engineers worked day and night to retrofit the ships, welding sealed chambers around propeller shafts, filling them with seawater, and installing rubber bladders against the engine mounts. It was a crude, makeshift process, and the Navy engineers were highly skeptical. They couldn't understand how something so simple could possibly work. The real challenge came with time. The Navy was already stretched thin. The war was ongoing, and there was little time to waste. But the need for a solution was urgent. The convoy was leaving in just a few days, and the engineers worked relentlessly to ensure everything was ready. With only 48 hours to complete the modifications, it was clear that the success of the entire idea rested on these 6 ships. As the convoy sailed on April 22, 1943, the pressure mounted. The modified ships were scattered throughout the formation, and the convoy set sail without any word of the experiment leaking out. The German U-boat fleet had already anticipated an attack. They had positioned their wolf packs to intercept. But this time, something was different. When the U-boat crews attempted to locate the convoy, their hydrophones didn't work as expected. The modified ships were practically invisible. No matter how much they listened, no matter how hard they tried, the sound wasn't there. The wolf packs couldn't coordinate their attacks. The convoy, once a sitting duck, had turned into an impenetrable force. The result was extraordinary. The loss rate of merchant ships dropped dramatically. In fact, out of the 9 ships sunk during that attack, not one was a modified ship. And that, my friends, was the moment when the tide of the Battle of the Atlantic turned. After that successful experiment, the Allies began retrofitting more ships with the acoustic dampening system, and the results spoke for themselves. The U-boat detection range plummeted from 12 miles to under half a mile. This made it far more difficult for the enemy to detect the convoys, and it forced the U-boat crews to come much closer, putting them within range of Allied sonar and radar. This made them far more vulnerable to attack. U-boat losses soared. German submarines that once had the upper hand were now being hunted in turn. The Allies had, for the first time in years, achieved a level of technical superiority in the battle for the Atlantic. By the end of 1943, the changes were undeniable. The fleet-wide implementation of Lawson's simple yet revolutionary acoustic dampening system became one of the most effective tools the Allies had against the U-boats. The system proved so successful that it eventually became a standard feature on all US Navy warships after the war. And as for Tommy Lawson, well, he never sought fame or recognition. Despite the fact that his insane idea had changed the course of history, he returned to his life as a small-time diner owner in Boston. The world would forget his name, but the legacy of his innovation would live on forever. Years after the war, Lawson was approached by a British naval historian who uncovered the full story of his contribution. It wasn't until 1978 that the world truly understood how one cook, no training, no credentials, no fancy degrees, had saved thousands of lives and changed naval warfare forever. In fact, it wasn't just the Navy that benefited from his innovation. The basic principles of his acoustic dampening system were used in naval operations for decades, and the lesson from Tommy Lawson's story is simple. Innovation doesn't always come from experts, from those with all the credentials. Sometimes it comes from someone who's willing to notice what everyone else misses, someone who's willing to challenge the status quo and risk it all. Tommy Lawson succeeded not because he was trained in acoustics, but because he paid attention to the world around him. His willingness to observe and act saved thousands of lives. That's the kind of courage and ingenuity that makes history. If you think this story is as crazy as I do, hit that like button, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. You won't want to miss the next unbelievable tale from history. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Tommy Lawson's genius wasn't about fancy degrees or titles. It was about noticing the world around him, seeing something others missed, and having the courage to act. Thanks for listening.